The air in the grand convocation chamber smelled of ozone and something sweet, a scent the station's environmental systems pumped in to calm species with nerves. It did nothing for Ambassador Lee. He stood perfectly still at the human delegation's podium, a simple brushed steel rise in the ornate hall. His hands were clasped loosely behind his back. His dark suit was standard issue, unadorned. Before him, in a shimmering array of floating platforms and liquid-filled pods, sat the representatives of the Galactic Concord. The XYL ambassador was speaking. Its body was a collection of delicate, frond-like appendages that swayed as it communicated through a shimmering translation orb. The proposed rerouting of the Lyra corridor through Sector Theta 7 is not a matter of dominance, but of harmonious traffic flow. It chimed, a sound like glass bells. The current human-patrolled route is inefficient. It is also perilously close to the disputed Proxima binary system, a volatile region, unsuitable for consistent commerce. Lee's aide, Sujin, sat at a small console to his right. Her fingers moved silently over the interface, recording every word, every subtle shift in the chamber's diplomatic energy field. Her face was a study in neutral attention. She had learned to keep her eyes slightly unfocused, taking in the whole scene without making direct optical contact, which several species found aggressive. The Proxima system's volatility is precisely why our patrols are necessary, Lee said, his voice a low, calm baritone that cut through the XYL's chimes. The gravitational shearing protects 3 developing pre-sapient civilizations from piracy. Our presence is a stabilizer. A low hum came from the bulky, mineral-based delegate of the Korvac. Stabilizer, an interesting term for a blockade. Your ships are intimidating, Ambassador. Their designs are blunt. They frighten the peaceful traders of the Lividian flock. Lee did not sigh. He had practiced not sighing. A sigh in this chamber was coded as resignation to the XYL, combative expulsion of gas to the Korvac, and a sign of terminal illness to the gelatinous slorb floating in its nutrient tank. Our designs are functional for the radiation levels and particulate density of the region. They are not meant as aesthetic statements. The XYL's fronds rippled, a sign of amusement. Of course, form follows function. A primitive concept, but understandable for a species from a Class 12 death world. The title hung in the air. It was always used. A reminder, your home is a place of murderous gravity, predatory biology, and chaotic weather. You are creatures of survival, not refinement. Earth's challenges have shaped us, Lee replied, the standard, tired response. They have granted us resilience. Resilience. Yes, the XYL chimed louder now. It is admirable. Your physical endurance, your rapid healing, your tolerance for toxins and extreme temperatures. It is quite the spectacle. But the galaxy runs on more than robust biology. It runs on subtlety, on harmony, on the delicate balance of energies and intentions. These are learned arts, Ambassador. They require a less forceful touch. Lee felt the words not as an insult, but as a weight. It was the same weight he had felt for a decade. The weight of being seen as a fascinating, dangerous animal, one that had somehow learned to operate starships. They admired the human vigor, but dismissed the mind that channeled it. They saw the storm, but never the architect who designed the storm shelter. Our proposal stands, the Korvac delegate rumbled. The Concorde will reroute the Lyra corridor through Sector Theta 7. Your patrols may remain in the Proxima region if you wish to stabilize the emptiness. But Concorde traffic will flow along a more civilized path. It was a dismissal, a stripping of responsibility and economic relevance in one move. To argue further would be to perform the very brute force stubbornness they expected. Lee looked from the XYL to the Korvac, then to the dozens of other alien faces and sensors watching. He saw curiosity, disdain, boredom, a flicker of pity from the avian Lividian. He dipped his head, a minimal human gesture. The human delegation hears the will of the Concorde. We will consider our position. The session moved on to the next agenda item, a dispute over helium-3 harvesting rights in a nebula. Lee stood and listened, but he was no longer truly present. The fatigue was a deep, cold pool inside him. It was not the fatigue of a long day, but of a long century. The fatigue of shouting into a beautiful, silent void that an hour later, in the human quarters, the silence was different. It was a relief. The quarters were sparse, all clean lines and soft gray tones, a deliberate contrast to the chaotic opulence outside. Lee stood by the large observation port, looking at the swirling blues and purples of the nebula Unity Prime orbited. It was stunning, and he felt nothing for it. Sujin finished her secure data upload and walked over, handing him a small cup of tea. Real tea from Earth. The official transcript will be published in 3 cycles. They will edit the primitive concept line out. But the subcom channels are already buzzing with the raw feed. The narrative is set. Lee took the cup, the warmth seeping into his fingers. What is the narrative today, Sujin? That the Deathworlders are clinging to their little patch of chaos. That they fear being sidelined by more sophisticated traffic management. That their strength is their only currency, and it's being devalued. She said it flatly, without anger. It was just data. They see a fist where there is a hand open for work, Lee murmured, sipping the tea. The familiar, earthy taste was a tiny anchor. They only have a category for the fist, Sujin replied. The open hand confuses them. They think it is a prelude to the fist. Lee turned from the view. His face, usually a placid mask, showed the fine lines of exhaustion around his eyes. We have spent generations trying to explain. We have shown them our art, our music, our literature. They call it interesting expressions of primal emotion. We have shared our sciences. They call it pragmatic brute force engineering. We have fought their wars for them on hellscape planets. They called us effective biological weapons systems. We are tired, Sujin. It was not an angry declaration. It was a quiet, final statement of fact. The kind uttered when a long, futile task is finally, peacefully, abandoned. What do we do? She asked. Lee walked to his secure terminal. He placed his palm on the scanner. A holographic interface glowed to life. He began to type, his movements deliberate. We stop explaining. We stop performing. We are going home. Sujin watched as he composed a message, not to the Concorde, but to Earth Central. The header was simple. Proposal. Operation Homestead. The body of the text was shorter. It read, "The gulf is not one of violence, but of understanding. We have bridged it from our side for long enough. They do not wish to cross. We are ceasing to explain. We recommend full recall. Let us build a home we understand. For ourselves." He paused before sending. He looked at Sujin. She gave a single, slow nod. There was no excitement in it, no rebellion. Only the same profound weariness, and a glimmer of relief. Lee pressed the send command. The message vanished into the quantum stream, headed for a world of storms and sunlight and stubborn, beautiful life. In the quiet room, the only sound was the distant, artificial hum of the station. A sound they would soon leave behind forever. The first step was not a shout, not a blow. It was a quiet turning away. The message from Unity Prime arrived on Earth. It was not debated for long. The weariness Lee spoke of was not his alone. It was a quiet tide that had been rising across every nation and colony. The decision was made in a simple vote. The order went out. The change began so quietly the galaxy almost missed it. On the lush, ringed world of Viridia Prime, Engineer Juan received his packet. He was in the massive control hub of Terraformer Theta, a machine the size of a mountain that was calming the planet's violent weather. The Viridians, a delicate plant-like species, had hired humanity for the task. Their own machines could not handle the electrostatic storms. Juan read the words on his secure pad. Recall Directive Alpha. Withdraw all personnel. Leave projects in stable condition. Initiate silent protocol. He felt a strange calm. He looked out the viewport at the now gentle green skies, the result of 5 years of his team's work. He turned to his Viridian liaison, whose frond-like sensory organs waved in a relaxed pattern. The stabilization cycle is complete, Juan said, his voice even. The core is self-sustaining. The weather patterns will remain within the parameters you requested for the next 300 years. The Viridian emitted a scent of sweet pollen, a sign of gratitude. Your efficiency is remarkable, Engineer Juan. We will process the final payment. Will your team remain for the celebratory bloom? Our mission is finished, Juan said, offering a small bow. We must return to our other duties. It was not a lie. It was just not the whole truth. Over the next weeks, Juan and his team methodically shut down their mobile equipment. They did not destroy anything. They did not take any of the proprietary technology the Viridians had hoped to study. They simply powered it down, placed it in neat, sealed rows in the hangar, and uploaded all maintenance codes to the Viridian network. Then, without ceremony, they boarded their sturdy, blocky shuttles and lifted off. The Viridians watched them go, sensing something unusual but attributing it to typical human bluntness. The same scene repeated across the Orion Spur on the desert trading post of Tal Bazaar. The human merchants began closing their stalls. They did not hold fire sales. They did not argue with customers. They simply finished their transactions, packed their unique goods, carvings from earthwood, textiles woven with metallic threads from Luna, data crystals of complex human music, into crates, and sealed them. When the Slorb merchant in the next stall gurgled a question about their early departure, the human merchant, a woman named Ga, simply smiled and said, "Inventory recall. Family business." The next morning, the stall was empty, clean, and dark. At the research station studying the gas giant Zephyr 9. The science team led by Dr. Min sealed their atmospheric probes in protective shells and left them floating in the stable upper layer, still collecting data. They uploaded the full access key to the station's mainframe, addressed to the Chelzan Science Guild who co-funded the project. Then they left. The Chelzan, when they discovered it, were baffled. The humans had left behind billions of credits worth of flawless equipment. It made no economic sense. The Galactic Concord's media networks began to notice. First, it was small reports. Human trade enclave on Lyra 3 goes quiet. Deathworlder engineers depart Viridia project ahead of schedule. The tone was curious, then amused. The major turning point was the recall of the fleet. From their patrol routes along the unstable Proxima Binary, from peacekeeping duties in the Lividian neutral zones, from guard posts along now former trade lanes, human ships began to move. They did not move in a threatening way. They formed into orderly convoys and, one by one, made the jump into faster-than-light travel, all on vectors leading back to the Sol system. The Korvac Military Command was the first to raise a public alert. Human martial forces are in wide-scale, coordinated motion. Their statement blared. The galaxy held its breath, fearing some long-feared Deathworlder tantrum, a violent redrawing of borders. But the human ships passed by every point of strategic importance. They ignored border stations. They did not approach core worlds. They simply streamed past, like a river reversing its course, flowing silently and determinately homeward, when the last human cruiser passed the outermost Concord beacon. Transmitting a standard, polite navigational warning as it went, the tension broke. It shattered into confusion, then into widespread derision. The Galactic News Network's leading commentator, a XYL named Fael, became the voice of the consensus. "They are leaving," he chimed, his fronds waving in amusement on screens across 1,000 worlds. "The Deathworlders, in a fit of pique, have taken their toys and gone home. They could not handle the subtle competition of the galactic marketplace. They could not adapt to a diplomacy that requires more than a strong arm and a louder voice. So they have retreated. They are returning to their violent little planet to sulk. It seems the famed human resilience does not extend to their egos." The theory spread. Humanity had overextended. Their primitive, if forceful, society had collapsed under the stress of integration. They were returning to their barbaric roots. The Concord Council, after a brief emergency session, issued a statement. It expressed concern for the people of Earth but affirmed that the stability of the galaxy was unaffected. They began formally rerouting trade lanes and assigning new peacekeepers to the regions humans had vacated. It was all very orderly. On the edge of the Sol system, the returning human ships were not sulking. They were busy. A massive, coordinated operation began just inside the orbit of Pluto. Freighters carrying mined materials from the asteroid belt met with engineering vessels. Prefabricated structures, designed decades ago and waiting in storage, were deployed. In a breathtakingly short time, a lattice of silent, gray-white platforms formed. They were not weapons. They were generator hubs, sensor arrays, and communication nodes. Engineer Juan's ship passed through this bustling, silent traffic. He saw no panic. He saw purpose. On his screen, a final message from Earth Central scrolled. Welcome home. The work begins. As the last civilian transport slipped into Earth's atmosphere and the last warship took its position in the new lattice, a single, unified command was executed. Across the vast expanse of the Sol system, from the chill of the Oort cloud to the warmth just inside the orbit of Venus, the generator hubs activated. They did not emit a weaponized pulse. They emitted a perfectly coordinated field of shaped gravity and subtle spacetime manipulation. The outside galaxy, watching from probes and telescopes, the Sol system smoothed over. It became a perfect, shimmering bubble. Stars' light bent around it seamlessly. Sensors could not penetrate it. Communications bounced off. It was not a violent barrier. It was an absolute, silent curtain. The only thing that passed through was a repeating, automated message on all standard galactic frequencies, in a calm, androgynous human voice. Humanity is in reflection. Thank you for your patience. Then, there was only quiet. The galaxy, feeling smug and victorious, turned its attention back to its own affairs. The Deathworlders were gone, a problem that had solved itself. They had no idea what was happening inside the bubble. They had no idea that the silence was not an end, but a beginning. Inside the bubble, there was no panic. There was no loud celebration or military parade. The silence that had fallen over the solar system was deep, but it was not empty. It was the silence of intense, focused work. On Earth, in a coordination center built into the side of a mountain, Lee and Sujin watched the data streams. Screens showed the last of the external probes going dark as the exclusion field solidified. A soft, green light filled the room. Lee finally let out a breath, a real one, the kind he could never allow on Unity Prime. The weight on his shoulders did not vanish, but it changed. It was no longer the weight of alien expectations. It was the weight of a future they now had to build entirely for themselves. The field is stable, Sujin said, her voice calm. Total sensory isolation is confirmed. We are off the galactic stage. Good, Lee replied. Now we get to work on our own home. This was the core of the plan they had called Operation Homestead. It was not a plan for war or isolation in the sense of hiding. It was a plan for synthesis. For 100 years, humanity had stretched itself across the stars, trying to fit into shapes designed by others. Now they would pull all their knowledge, all their scattered people, all their different cultures back into one place, and they would weave it all together. The first step was called the unification. It was not a law or a government. It was a conversation. All across Earth and the colonies on Mars, the Luna cities, and the orbital habitats, every person was linked into a new network. This was not for control. It was for sharing. Philosophers like Mina, who had spent her life studying the stress of interstellar diplomacy, now had a planet-sized classroom. Her voice, gentle and clear, was part of the shared stream. We have spent generations looking outward, trying to see ourselves as the galaxy saw us, she said, her words translating instantly into hundreds of languages. We were the Deathworlders, the strong, violent, simple ones. But look at what that strength built. It built families who survived disasters. It built communities that worked together. It built art and music from that struggle. Our strength was never just about fists. It was about resilience, about caring for each other in a universe that felt cold. Now, the universe is not our concern. Our concern is each other. Our concern is this, our only home. A man named June, a logistics engineer who had once managed supply lines for 100 star systems, now turned his mind to a single one. His challenge was zero waste. Every resource in the solar system had to be tracked, used, reused, and recycled. Asteroid mines were recalibrated. Factory orbits were adjusted. He worked with teams on Earth who were redesigning cities to be self-sufficient in food and energy. It was a giant puzzle, and for the first time, all the pieces were on one table, and no one was trying to take them away. On Mars, the great terraforming engines, once pushed to their limits to make a second Earth for expanding species, were gently dialed back. The project was not abandoned. It was redefined. The goal was no longer to create a copy of Earth, but to create a stable, healthy Mars that could exist in balance. The atmosphere processors hummed at a sustainable level. The red planet began to slowly, gently green at the poles. The most profound work was cultural. For so long, human history had been a story of us and them. Now the only them was gone. The focus turned entirely to us. Artists collaborated across continents in the shared virtual space. Musicians blended sounds from cultures that had once been separated by oceans and then by light years. Stories were told. Not stories of defeating aliens, but stories of endurance, of quiet love, of fixing a broken machine, of tending a garden. A young woman named Ga, who had been a medic on a distant station, now worked in a clinic in Seoul. She used the advanced medical knowledge humans had developed, knowledge the galaxy had called brute force biomanipulation, to heal without scarring, to cure diseases that had once been fatal. But the technology was only part of it. The other part was her focus. Her patient was not a number. They were a neighbor. They were part of the same project. This was the great synthesis. The fierce independence that came from a death world was fused with a profound, collective will. The technology that had been seen as crude became elegant in its perfect efficiency. The social structures that had been strained by galactic politics became strong and flexible. Lee toured a new agricultural dome at the edge of what was once a desert. The air inside was rich with the smell of soil and growing plants. A young man showed him how the water was recycled, how the waste was composted, how the energy came from small, perfect fusion cells. "It's beautiful," Lee said, meaning it. "It's necessary," the young man replied with a smile. "And because it's necessary, we made it beautiful." That was the spirit that spread. They were not just surviving. They were building a civilization that was whole. A civilization that did not need anything from outside. Their weariness with the galaxy's arrogance had turned into a deep contentment with their own company and the Mountain Coordination Center. Sujin reviewed the final reports of the first year. Energy production, stable and surplus. Food supply, secure for all. Population morale, rising. Cultural output, thriving. Conflict levels, near zero. "They were wrong about us," she said to Lee, looking at the data. "How so?" he asked. "They thought our strength was for breaking things," she said. "But it was always for building things. They just never gave us the piece to show it. They were always watching, always judging. Now, with no one watching, we can finally be what we always were." Outside, beyond the mountain, the earth turned. On the dark side of the planet, the cities glowed not with frantic, wasteful light, but with a calm, steady luminance. In the space around them, the silent field held. Inside the bubble, humanity was not preparing for a war. They were achieving a peace they had never known. They were becoming a single, intricate, self-sustaining system. They were not hiding. They were home, and they were busy making that home perfect. The galaxy, for a time, enjoyed the quiet. The human problem had solved itself. Trade routes flowed smoothly along the new paths. Other species filled the jobs humans had left behind, though many noted the work was slower, the machines less efficient, the solutions not as robust. Still, it was a small price to pay for not having to deal with those intense, unsettling Deathworlders. This comfortable feeling lasted about a standard galactic year. Then, the Chelzen Civil War spilled into the shipping lanes. The Chelzen were a crustacean-like species, prone to violent internal conflicts. One faction, the Remnant, was fleeing its defeat. Its last dreadnought, the Chiton's Pride, was critically damaged. Its drives were failing. Its life support was on backup. It was leaking radiation and atmosphere into the dark. The galaxy watched. The Concord had rules about military intervention in internal conflicts. Protocol had to be followed. Debates were held. The Remnant's pleas for asylum were processed through committees. The chitin's pride was drifting, dying, on a course that would eventually take it near the edge of a certain silent sector of space. On the bridge of the dying ship, Captain Vex struggled with his broken claws over the navigation console. His secondary eyes were sealed shut from injury. His crew was dying around him. The scanners showed only one nearby system with any power signature at all, but it was a forbidden one. The human system, the bubble. "Captain," his first officer clicked weakly. "Concord says the asylum hearing is in 10 cycles. They are sending a rescue tender in 12 cycles." Vec understood. They were being left to die politely. The rules were more important. He looked at the smooth, impossible bubble on his screen, blotting out the stars behind it. The humans had been strange. They had been blunt. But he remembered a human medic on a joint station long ago. The human had fixed a tear in his shell with a strange, sticky paste and a beam of light, without asking for payment or rank. The human had just nodded and said, "You'll be fine. New course," Vec commanded, his voice a pained rasp. "Set for the soul exclusion zone. Maximum drift." "The humans? They will vaporize us," the officer clicked in terror. "Or they will ignore us," Vec said. "But the Concorde is already ignoring us. I prefer a maybe to a certainty." He input the course himself. The wounded ship turned, a slow, sad drift toward the shimmering wall. The galaxy's sensors tracked it. News feeds picked up the story. "Fugitive ship to commit suicide by Deathworld," the headlines screamed. It was a tragedy, but also a fascinating experiment. What would the humans do? The consensus was swift. The violent primates would see the approach as an attack. The bubble would flash with weapon fire, and the chitin's pride would become dust. A fitting, if grim, end. The ship crossed the nominal boundary. It trembled, waiting for the blast. It did not come. Instead, a calm, synthetic voice pinged across its open comms. "Vessel Chitin's pride. You are on a collision course with a stable gravitational lens. Please adjust your vector." On the bridge, the Chelzen stared at each other. It was a traffic warning. We cannot," Vec transmitted back, every word an effort. "Systems failing. Crew dying. We request. He did not know what to request. Sanctuary? From whom? Mercy? Did the concept even exist here? There was a pause. 2 seconds. 5. "Understood," the voice replied. A traction beam, unimaginably smooth and powerful, locked onto the crippled hull. It did not jerk them. It caught them like a gentle hand catching a falling leaf. The chitin's pride was pulled, effortlessly, through the shimmering barrier. Inside the Sol system, the Chelzen expected to see a fortress. They expected armadas, weapon platforms, a society geared for war. They saw clean, empty space. They saw orderly traffic between planets, sleek, functional ships that moved with quiet purpose. They saw the Earth, a stunning blue-green marble, and Mars with its new hints of green. There were no screaming alarms, no targeting lasers. Their ship was guided, with that same gentle force, into a docking embrace on the port side of Deimos, the smaller moon of Mars. The bay was bright, clean, and calm. A human in a simple, gray environmental suit was there. She did not carry a weapon. She held a scanner. As the airlock connected and pressurized, she stepped aboard. Her faceplate was transparent. She was young. She looked at the injured Captain Vec, her expression professional but not unkind. "I am Medic GA," she said, her translator emitting perfect, calm Chelzen clicks. "Your crew will be assisted. Please do not resist. We are here to help." What followed was not an interrogation. It was a hospital visit. The injured Chelzen were moved to a clean, white facility. The air was perfectly matched to their needs. GA and other medics used devices that seemed to work by thought. A wand passed over a burn, and the shell repaired itself, smooth and whole. A crushed limb was straightened under a soft light, the pain vanishing instantly. They were given nutrient pastes that tasted of home. Captain Vec, his body healing, was given a room with a view of Mars. A human, introduced as June from logistics, visited him. Your ship's drive core is damaged beyond our ability to repair with your technology, June said. But we have manufactured a replacement. It is compatible. It will be more efficient. Why? Vec clicked, utterly confused. Why are you doing this? We invaded your space. June tilted his head. A human gesture Vec did not understand. You were in need. We have the ability to help. The two facts are connected. He said it as if it were the most obvious thing in the universe, like saying water is wet. Your ship will be ready in 3 days. You are free to move within this wing. During those 3 days, the Chelzan saw glimpses. They saw humans working together in quiet harmony. They saw no signs of military buildup. They saw gardens growing under domes. They heard music from open doorways. They saw a society that was not preparing for anything because it lacked nothing. When the Chitin's pride was returned to them, it was not just repaired. It was improved. The engines were quieter. The life support was cleaner. The hull was sealed and polished. Even the interior smelled fresh. The airlock. Captain Vec faced Medic GA and Logistician June. What do we owe you? He asked, expecting a bill, a treaty, a demand. June shook his head. Nothing. You were in need. Now you are not. What do we tell the Concord? Vec asked. His mind reeling. Daz smiled a small, peaceful smile. Tell them you were in need. We helped. Our door is not a weapon. She paused, and her smile faded into something more serious, but still not unkind. But it is also not open. The airlock closed. The traction beam guided the Chitin's pride back through the bubble, depositing it safely light years away from Sol. The Chelzan ship immediately sent out its distress call again. The Concord rescue tender, finally on its way, found them. They found a healthy, sane crew in a perfectly functioning ship. The galaxy's media went silent. Then it exploded. The story the Chelzan told was impossible. Gentle giants? Medical magic? Free repairs? It made no sense. The narrative of the sulking, collapsed Deathworlders shattered against the hard, simple facts. The Concord Council demanded a meeting. They sent frantic hails to the Sol system. The only response was the same, calm message. Humanity is in reflection. Thank you for your patience. But the meaning had changed. It was no longer the message of a child in timeout. It was the message of someone who had closed the door to a noisy party. Because inside their quiet room, they were building something marvelous, and they were no longer interested in the noise outside. The fear that settled over the galaxy was cold and new. It was not the fear of a coming attack. It was the fear of being judged and found irrelevant by something they could no longer even see. The Chelzan account was a stone dropped into the still pond of galactic society. The ripple started small, then grew into waves that crashed against every assumption. First, the media cycle spun into chaos. The old narratives broke. The story of the sulking, primitive humans could not explain a flawless medical miracle and a gifted starship engine. New theories bloomed like strange weeds. Maybe the humans had found an ancient, powerful technology inside their bubble? Maybe they had made a deal with a darker force? The most popular and most unsettling theory was the simplest. The Chelzan were telling the truth. On Unity Prime, the mood in the Concord Council chambers was no longer one of amused dismissal. It was a cold, quiet dread. The XYL ambassador, its fronds now still and tight, reviewed the sensor data from the Chitin's pride. The scans were undeniable. The ship's drive signature was now 30% more efficient, with a radiation profile near zero. The technology was not just advanced. It was clean in a way Concord science could not comprehend. They did not just fix it. The Korvac delegate rumbled, its mineral body grinding softly in distress. They improved it. As an afterthought, they were not hiding in failure. They were busy. That single word, busy, carried terrible weight. What had they been busy doing? The economic shock hit next. A young Slorb economist, floating in its tank, made the connection public. The human patents, it gurgled through its translator. A wave of panic swept through the markets. For decades, humanity had held patents on key technologies. Stable artificial gravity for long-haul ships, efficient plasma containment for reactors, even a form of data compression. The galaxy used these under license, paying fees. The fees were a line item, a small tax on doing business. The patents had expiration dates. Legal experts now checked the dates and felt a chill. The patents were expiring. Not because humans had lost the rights, but because the patent protections were tied to Concord membership. By withdrawing, humanity had let the legal structures fall away. But the knowledge did not vanish. It was now loose in the universe, except no one outside the bubble had the core knowledge to use it. Worse, the humans had been improving these technologies in secret. The galaxy was about to lose access to the basic version, while the creators held a master version behind a wall they could not breach. Corporate empires faced ruin. Shipyards that relied on human gravity plating could no longer produce new ships. The panic was instant. The military analysis was the most terrifying. Admirals and generals gathered in secure rooms. They played war games against the bubble. Every scenario ended the same way. Send a fleet? The bubble showed no weapon systems to target. Attack an enemy that does not show a weapon is impossible. Try to breach the barrier? The gravitational lensing would shred any ship that made a hostile move. The Chelzan had been dying, and thus not hostile. They were allowed in. A warship would be seen as hostile. It would be destroyed not by a missile, but by physics itself. Their defense is not a shield. The Korvax Supreme Commander stated, its voice hollow. It is a door, and they decide who knocks. We define strength as a bigger gun. Their strength is the ability to choose who they even acknowledge. This was the core of the new fear. Arrogance requires an audience. It requires someone to look down upon. Humanity was no longer looking at them. They had turned their gaze entirely inward. The galaxy's posturing, its politics, its subtle insults. They were all signals sent into a void. The humans were not listening. The XYL ambassador requested a private channel to the Sol system, using the old diplomatic codes from Lee's time. To its shock, the connection opened. A hologram of Lee appeared. He looked different. The deep weariness around his eyes was gone. He looked rested. He stood in a room with growing plants and soft light. Ambassador. The XYL chimed, its tones carefully modulated to convey respect and concern. The galaxy is concerned. The incident with the Chelzan. It raises questions. We must talk. The energy crisis in the Lividian sectors is worsening. The technology you used to heal that crew, your new engine designs, they could bring stability. We are prepared to offer generous terms for shared knowledge. Lee listened. His face showed no anger, no triumph. It showed the mild patience of someone listening to a child explain why they needed a third dessert. You misunderstand, Lee said, his voice calm and clear. We are not imposing a blockade. We are simply at home. The XYL's fronds quivered. But the need is great. Your moral duty to lesser species. Lee interrupted gently. You once defined strength as the ability to dominate others, to make them bend to your will. We grew weary of that definition. We define strength differently now. We see it as the ability to be content with oneself, to be utterly self-reliant, to be at peace. The knife you feared we would wield. He paused, and a small, genuine smile touched his lips. We melted it down. We used the material to build a better plow. For our garden. He gestured to the plants behind him, which we will tend. Alone. The XYL ambassador felt a sensation it had never known. It was not defeat. It was something worse. It was irrelevance. Humanity was not saying no. Humanity was saying their question no longer mattered. You are abandoning the community of life? The XYL finally chimed, a note of desperation breaking through. We are living, Lee corrected softly, fully, for the first time. Goodbye. The transmission ended. The silent, shimmering bubble remained in cafes on 100 worlds. Philosophers and ordinary citizens talked. The story spread. The humans had not fought. They had not argued. They had simply left. And in leaving, they had shown the galaxy its own reflection. The reflection showed a society so obsessed with hierarchy and subtle power that it had mistaken basic kindness for weakness and peaceful silence for defeat. The legend of the Deathworlder died that day. A new legend was born in its place. They did not call it a legend of fear. They called it the legend of the self-contained. It was a story that kept admirals awake at night, not because they feared an attack, but because they could not plan for a future where their entire purpose, to defend or to conquer, was meaningless. On an observation platform on the edge of Concord space, two young Levidians watched the starfield, their feathers rustling. "Do you think they are happy in there?" one asked. The other was silent for a long time. "I think," it said finally, "that for them, whether we think about them or not is no longer a question that crosses their minds. And that is the most peaceful and the most powerful thing I can imagine." The galaxy had prepared for a shout. It was completely unprepared for the quiet that answered. A quiet that was not empty, but full. A quiet that belonged entirely to someone else. The galactic concord was falling apart. It was not an explosion. It was a slow, silent crumbling, like a wall made of sand. The human bubble was a mirror, and every species saw a different, unsettling reflection of themselves. The XYL saw their cherished subtlety exposed as meaningless chatter. Their intricate diplomatic dances were just noise to a listener who had turned off the sound. The core Vac saw their physical might rendered useless against a barrier they could not punch. The Chelzan, now a pariah faction saved only by human hands, saw their endless civil wars as a pathetic waste. The energy crisis in the Lividian sectors grew critical. The old human-patented stabilizers were failing, and no one could build new ones. Food riots began on 3 worlds. The Concord Council, paralyzed by procedure, debated aid packages while species starved. A faction emerged, led by a young XYL philosopher named KTH. It was a small group, made up of thinkers, artists, and scientists from many species. They called themselves the Quiet Seekers. They did not demand the humans' return. They asked a different question. What had humanity found inside that bubble that was more valuable than the entire galaxy? Their answer was simple, and it spread like a quiet virus. Peace. Wholeness on the edge of the soul bubble. A single, unarmed Lividian transport ship approached. It was small, fragile, its hull feathers ruffled from poor maintenance. It did not hail. It did not ask for permission. It simply turned off its engines and let its momentum carry it towards the shimmering field. It was a ship of pilgrims, led by a Lividian named Tlek, a follower of KTH. They were not asking for technology. They were asking for nothing. They were hoping, in their silent drift, to be noticed by a civilization that saw value in life. The galaxy watched, holding its breath again. Would the humans destroy this peaceful, foolish gesture? The traction beam found them. It was the same gentle, impossible force. It captured the Lividian ship and pulled it through the barrier. Inside, Tlek and the others saw the clean space, the calm traffic. They were brought to a different facility, this one on an orbital ring around Earth. It was not a hospital. It was more like a quiet retreat. No human asked them for their purpose. A human guide, a woman named Mina with kind eyes, showed them to simple rooms with windows looking out on the blue planet. "You may stay here," she said. "You may observe. You may not record with technology, but you may remember. You may ask us questions." Tlek, his feathers trembling, asked the first one. "Why did you save the Chelzan? Why are you allowing us here?" Mina poured a cup of tea for him, a gesture she had learned was common for many species. "Because you were in need," she said, echoing the words spoken to the Chelzan. "And because you came without a weapon, even a weapon of words. You came with empty hands. That is a language we understand." The Levidians spent weeks there. They saw no palaces, no grand monuments. They saw cities that were clean and full of green spaces. They saw humans working, but not in frantic hurry. They saw children playing. They heard music that was complex but also deeply soothing. They saw a society that had solved the basic problems of existence, food, energy, health, purpose, and had moved on to simply living well. Tlek asked Mina about conflict. "How do you decide things? Who leads?" "We lead ourselves," she explained. "The network connects us. We share information, ideas, needs.
Solutions émergées.
If someone has a better idea for growing food, they share it. If it works, it is adopted. There is no one to argue with because the goal is the same for everyone, the health of the whole. And if someone refuses, if they are selfish, Fleck asked, using a word common in galactic politics. Mina smiled. We have little need for selfishness. There is no scarcity. There is no higher status to gain. To harm the whole is to harm yourself, and everyone can feel that harm through the network. It is obvious, so it rarely happens. It was a simplicity so profound it seemed like magic. They had not conquered greed. They had made it pointless. When the time came for the Levidians to leave, their ship was repaired and refueled. They were given supplies of food, strange and delicious human fruits that grew in orbital gardens. They were not given a single piece of advanced technology. At the airlock, Fleck faced Mina. What should we tell the galaxy? Tell them what you saw, she said. Not with your eyes, but with your heart. Tell them we are not a threat. Tell them we are just home. And tell them that a home must first be built inside, before it can be built outside. The Lividian ship was released. It returned to a galaxy now deeply divided. The Concord Council, in a final, desperate move, declared the human bubble a zone of existential risk and voted to form a unified fleet, a grand armada of every species, to force the humans to engage, to share, to obey the rules of the community. The fleet assembled. It was the largest military force ever gathered. It was meant to be a show of such overwhelming power that the humans would have to listen. They gathered just outside the bubble. They broadcast their ultimatum on all frequencies. Humanity of soul, you are ordered to lower your barrier and accept a Concord delegation. Your isolation is a threat to galactic stability. You will comply. The silence from the bubble was absolute. The fleet commander, a Corps Vac admiral, gave the order. A single warning shot from the flagship, a brilliant lance of plasma, streaked towards the shimmering field. The beam did not strike the field. A few kilometers from the boundary, it slowed, bent, and twisted gently in on itself, forming a perfect, glowing circle of light that pulsed once, harmlessly, and then faded away. It was not destroyed. It was dismissed. Then, on every screen in every cockpit of the massive fleet, a single image appeared. It was Earth, not from space but from the surface. A view from a mountainside, looking over a calm forest at dawn. The light was golden. The air was clear. The only sound was the whisper of wind and the distant call of a bird. It was unbearably, perfectly peaceful. The image held for 1 full minute. No words.
No threats.
No demands. Then it vanished, and the bubble was just a bubble again. On the bridge of the flagship, the Corps Vac admiral stared at the screen where the terrifying image of perfect peace had been. This mineral body felt cold. It had prepared for war cries, for explosions, for defiant speeches. It had no defense for that. It had no weapon that could fight a sunrise over a quiet forest. One by one. Across the vast armada, ships powered down their weapons. They turned. They retreated. Not in defeat, but in a dawning, awful understanding. The humans were not refusing to talk. They were showing them the conversation was over. The question had been answered. The answer was the mountain, the forest, the dawn. The answer was a world that needed nothing from them. The message was clear, and it broke the Concord forever. We are not a part of your story anymore. Go and write your own. We are busy living ours. The ultimate power was not the power to destroy. It was the power to be complete and to have nothing more to say. Centuries are long for mortals, but short for history. The Galactic Concord, as it was known, no longer existed. It had not been conquered. It had simply unraveled. The shock of the human silence, as it came to be called, had been too profound. The failed armada was its last act. After that, the central authority held no more meaning. Species turned inward or formed small, local alliances based on mutual need, not ambition. Humanity did not return. The bubble remained. It became a permanent feature of the stellar maps, a softly glowing orb in the Sol system. It was no longer a mystery to be solved. but a fact to be accepted. Like a mountain range or a deep ocean trench, it was simply there, beautiful and impenetrable. A young historian named Elsia, from a species of gentle archivists, dedicated her life to studying the era. She had access to all the records, the arrogant council sessions, the dismissive media reports, the Chelzan testimonies, the Lividian pilgrim journals. She sat in a quiet archive on a peaceful world, her delicate fingers tracing the data on a screen. Her conclusion, published in a simple thesis, became the accepted understanding for those who cared to learn. She wrote, "Humanity's greatest weapon was not its capacity for violence, inherited from its death world, but its capacity for collective patience. Their weariness with galactic arrogance was not the end of their story, but the prelude to a new kind of evolution, one of synthesis and contentment. They did not conquer the galaxy. They rendered it irrelevant by building something they valued more, and then quietly closing the door. In doing so, they taught the galaxy the most humbling lesson of all, that the ultimate power is the power to walk away and to be perfectly, utterly happy without you." Inside the bubble, life continued. It was not a static paradise, but a living, breathing, growing civilization. It had reached a steady, vibrant rhythm on a green hillside in what was once called Korea. An old woman named Sujin tended a bonsai tree. The tree was ancient, a gnarled pine in a shallow pot. Her hands, wrinkled but steady, carefully trimmed a single needle. She did not need to look up to see the data streams of her civilization. They flowed in the back of her mind, a gentle hum of well-being. Resource levels optimal, cultural exchanges thriving, a birth celebrated on Mars, a new symphony debuting in a lunar dome. She felt it all, not as a distraction, but as the comforting pulse of a healthy body. She was part of it, and it was part of her. There was no them to manage, only us. A young boy, her great-grandson, ran up the path. "Grandmother, June says the deep space telescopes have seen a new nebula forming near Orion. The light will reach us in 50 years. He says it will be beautiful." Sujin smiled, snipping another needle. "We will be here to see it." "Is it true?" the boy asked, his eyes wide with the curiosity of a child who knew only peace. "That there are other people out there, beyond the bubble?" "It is true," Sujin said, her gaze on the miniature tree, a whole landscape of patience in a pot. "Do they ever knock?" "Sometimes," she said. "Very rarely now. And if they are in true need, and ask with a quiet heart, the door will open just enough to help. Then it closes again. Why don't we go out? Why don't we visit them?" Sujin put down her tiny shears. She looked at the boy, then at the sky, which was a perfect, clear blue. "A long time ago, we spent all our time visiting. We found that, in trying to see everything else, we forgot to see ourselves. We have everything we need right here. The most interesting frontier is not out there." She tapped his chest gently. "It is in here, and we have all the time in the universe to explore it." The boy thought about this, then nodded, satisfied. He saw a butterfly and chased after it. Sujin returned to her tree.in, the Mountain Coordination Center. Now more of a serene monitoring hub, Lee was long gone. His descendants, physical and philosophical, maintained the watch. They were not guarding a fortress. They were tending a garden, ensuring the systems that supported their way of life remained in harmony. The alert about the new nebula was logged, a future gift of beauty to be appreciated. Outside, the galaxy moved on. New empires rose, fueled by different ambitions. Some tried to mimic the human synthesis in their own ways with varying success. The legend of the self-contained was a bedtime story for alien children, a myth of a people who found happiness and stopped. For most, humanity became a background thought, a philosophical footnote. And that was exactly as humanity wished. They had not sought oblivion. They had sought completion. The arrogance of the aliens had been a mirror showing them their own fragmented reflection. By turning away from that mirror, they had finally seen each other clearly. They had taken the fierce, deathworld love for family and community and scaled it to the level of a species, then a solar system. The bubble was not a prison. It was the frame around a masterpiece they were endlessly, joyfully creating together. Every quiet day, Every child's laugh, every solved problem, every new song was a brushstroke on that canvas. Sujin finished her pruning. She sat back on her bench, feeling the sun on her face. The hum of the network in her mind was a lullaby of a civilization at rest, yet vibrantly alive. She looked at her perfect, tiny tree, its branches shaped by centuries of care, existing in serene balance. Then she looked up at the sky, at the invisible wall that kept the noise out and the peace in. They had not won a war. They had ended one, the endless, exhausting war for recognition, for respect, for a place at a table they never wanted to sit at. They had built their own table, in their own home, and found it was all they ever needed. The galaxy was unprepared for what arrived after the Deathworlders' weariness. It was not a weapon. It was a quiet, contented sigh that lasted forever. And inside that sigh, a people finally, fully lived.